If Luke 14:21 is not about inclusion, then is Luke 14:12-14 also not about inclusion? Correct. It's not about inclusion. Let me explain. Luke 14:12-14 is actually part of yet another parable in Jesus' teachings on humility. So it's not literally about the disabled. Here's the passage in question, and it's important to note, Jesus said this to the one who had invited him. If you go all the way back to the very beginning of Luke 14, Jesus was at the house of one of the leading Pharisees. And that's important. That's a detail that I think is actually very relevant to what Jesus is teaching about. And again, they were also watching him closely. These little details matter to the context, what this is about, and why he's bringing it up. First, Jesus heals a man whose body was swollen with fluid, and it was on the Sabbath. And again, Pharisees were known. They had a lot of rules about what was considered work that could not be done on the Sabbath. And Jesus even says, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? And which of you, if your animal falls into a ditch, would not pull him back out, even on the Sabbath? Then he gets into his teachings on humility. Jesus is noticing that those who were invited were choosing the best places for themselves at the table. And so he again tells this parable that when you are invited somewhere, to choose a place of lesser honor. Because if you automatically take a place of higher honor, somebody else that's more distinguished and may show up, and then you're the one that's going to be humiliated when you are asked to move to a lesser spot, as opposed to selecting a lower spot to begin with and then being asked to move up to a higher spot. Then we get to verse 12. Notice, Jesus says this to the one who invited him, this prominent Pharisee. So think in modern times, maybe equivalent to Jesus being invited to the Vatican or the White House, something like that, because Pharisees were prominent people 2,000 years ago. So he said to the one who invited him, when you give lunch or dinner, don't invite your friends, brothers, sisters, relatives, etc., because they might invite you back and you will be repaid. Instead, invite those who are poor, maimed, lame, or blind, because they cannot repay you. This is about the humility of inviting those who cannot reciprocate. It's about not being performative and inviting those that you know are just going to make you look good, right? And dare I say, it's even in some sense a foreshadowing of Jesus' salvation, because God is ultimately inviting us to his banquet, knowing that none of us can repay him, right? None of us could ever do enough to gain God's favor or repay him for that free gift of salvation. We just can't do it. And I think that's a reasonable inference to make. However, it's important to remember that in both of these passages, both parts of Luke 14, the disabled, the poor, the blind, the lame, he does not mean that literally. This is part of larger parables, and that matters. We cannot take our modern understanding of disability justice and rights, etc., and impose that onto a 2,000-year-old culture where that didn't exist yet. Even our modern understanding of disability did not exist yet. Now, inclusion and accessibility in church is certainly very important. I am not negating or debating that whatsoever. But what I am saying is I don't think these passages in Luke 14 are the right scripture to justify that. I think when we do that, we run the risk of twisting scripture to make a point, and that we should not be doing. There are certainly other parts of scripture that I think we can use that do justify accessibility in church, disability inclusion for the gospel, 100%. But we should not be twisting scripture even a little bit in order to fit that agenda. We cannot read disability into the Bible, whether it's there or not, So instead of reading disability into the Bible, read the Bible as is to understand disability.